Well, hello, class. Chapter 4 is here. So hope everybody has been kind of following on for the first 3 chapters. Again, it's primarily introductory material, but hopefully by now, we're a couple weeks into the semester, you're starting to kind of see how we're starting to think about compensation from an internal standpoint and how do we keep that motivation going and how do we draw employees to us. Maybe the most important thing that compensation and total rewards professionals can accomplish is making the job analysis really tight, succinct, and easy to understand. Job analysis kind of talks about how do we look at the similarities and differences among jobs. What makes a marketing manager's job different than the accounting manager? Well, they're both managers. They both oversee employees. They may do performance evaluations. They may hire and fire people. But again, they obviously focus either on marketing or accounting, which is their area of specialty, but being a manager overlaps in so many different ways. So we want to talk about the similarities and the differences on the job, and that's called job analysis. And I'm sure most of you, if anybody who's ever had a job before, or even if you haven't, you've probably at least seen what a job description looks like. It's that piece of paper or that little listing online when you go to apply for a job that tells you this is what the job does. These are the duties. This is what you're responsible for accomplishing. These are the types of skills that an employer is looking for you to see if you're the right fit for them. So the job description kind of is a snapshot, if you will, of the whole job itself. Very, very important. And compensation professionals spend a ton of time on job descriptions. In my role here at Oklahoma State, in our human resources department, my team and I spend a large amount of time working on job descriptions. And what we find is, if you're creating a brand new job out of, that's never happened before, it's a little bit easier to kind of develop the job because you can kind of make it what you want. Where a lot of times, and a lot of compensation professionals will tell you, where the challenge becomes is if you have somebody who's been doing a job, let's say this person's an engineer and has been an engineer for 20 years in the same job, well, the job is probably a little bit different from day one all the way to 20 years down the road. So that job description evolves, it changes, it grows, it develops over time. So we as compensation professionals need to be able to figure out what has changed, how it's changed. Is the description still relevant to the person in that job? And do we see any future tendencies towards these individuals? So keeping an accurate job description is so important. It's something we're going to talk about a lot. And finally, we need to be specific on the job. So job specifications. What knowledge, skills, and abilities do we need? You'll hear me maybe use the term KSA a lot, K, S, and A. It just means knowledge, skills, and abilities. I will use that acronym quite a bit. So I want you to know it just means the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you need to perform the job. So very important information for us to understand. If you look at Exhibit 4.3, you'll kind of see what we call determining the internal job structure. This is going to kind of follow you along how we determine how we interact with each other in the organization. So as I mentioned, we start with a job analysis. We look at all the similarities and the differences between the work. We take that information and that helps us create our job description that kind of summarizes everything that we've developed so an applicant or even an internal employee will know what is expected of the job and how they can be successful in the job. Once we've done all of that and we have all these different jobs, look at us here at Oklahoma State. We have several thousand employees. So you can imagine how many different job descriptions we have throughout campus. So we take all that and we do what we call job evaluation, where we compare everything. The College of Arts and Sciences and the College of Business may have similar jobs, but the focuses of those two colleges are different. So we may have different, even the same person who has the same job title may do something different because they're in a different area. If you're a coordinator, for example, in the student union, your job is probably very different than a coordinator in athletics because of the nature of that work. So we use job evaluation to help us determine what makes our jobs different and how do we compare jobs. And once we've done all that, our final step is the job structure, is how do we structure all this? How do we make sense of it? How do we assign pay ranges to these different jobs? How do we determine growth? How do we determine market value? All of that structure is determined from the previous 3 steps. Again, this is kind of how organizations tend to develop their own internal jobs. And then whenever you get out in the working world, this is likely how your HR department will develop jobs themselves. Well, the last part of chapter 4 that I really want you to focus on is how do we get information? How do we collect what we need to talk about? And there's really a couple things we need to consider. First is job data and employee data. With job data, it kind of falls into two buckets. You have identification, which is basically job titles. What different departments are in your organization? How many people are in that job? So, for example, in my department, we could have a human resources consultant is a position that's in my department here at OSU. So I have my title, HR consultant, within the HR department, and there's currently 5 individuals in that role. So now we have a snapshot of that job. We've identified, so now we have our data to know what we're trying to accomplish. So now that we've ID'd that, now we have to look at the content, which is really where the meat and potatoes is. This is where everything kind of comes together. This is where we develop things called task data. So I may have 5 HR consultants, and they all essentially do the same thing, but again, they may slightly vary on what their focus is. For example, I have one consultant who's very strong in data analysis. That's just his background. He's really good at it. So, and more importantly, he enjoys doing that work. So I have other HR consultants who that's not their favorite thing in the world to do. Frankly, I have one who would never ever wants to do that information, and that's okay. So just because that is just one aspect of the job. So my one individual who's really good at data analysis, he can run a lot of data and reports and share that with his colleagues to develop more in-depth analyses. So my one consultant who's not a real big fan of data analysis, she's really good at writing. She's really good about writing real descriptive analyses. She's really good at marketing communications. So I take her strengths and we can help take that data and then she can tell a story with it. So all that works together to create the employee data. So even though they have the same job title and they have the same kind of basic things they want to accomplish, they can go about it in different ways. They can try to tell one story and they each take their strengths to tell that story. That's the employee data side of things. So again, chapter 4 really ties well into chapters 2 and 3 about internal alignment and how we want to continue to develop our internal analyses. Now, beginning with our next chapter, we're really going to start kind of getting more in depth on what we want to accomplish for the rest of the semester. Thanks, everyone.